look, if she puts pressure on Nancy Pelosi right now, yeah, she might burn a few bridges, but I don't think that would amount to career suicide for her. And I think if she really does care about building a progressive movement, this is a great opportunity for her to do this, because then in 2 years, if more progressives can then use this to win office, then her group, her coalition grows, and she is the figure of that coalition. So it gives her even more power. So this is, yeah, so you might consider it a risky play, but strategically speaking, politically, it may make sense for her as well, if she chooses to take that risk. All right, welcome. You are listening to The Brown Perspective. This is RO, and I'm here with my good buddy Eduardo. ¿Cómo estamos?
Aquí estamos bien contentos, listos para tener esta discusión de hoy.
All right, let's jump right into it. So there's this rift that's going on between the progressives and the liberals, moderately conservative liberals. I mean, there's such a spectrum, right?
But you're slicing it. You're really slicing that party affiliation right there.
Yeah. It started out mainly with Jimmy Dore when he proposed to advance a vote on Medicare for All. And
Jimmy Dore.
I don't know if, so the gist of it is he wants the progressive members of the House to tell Nancy Pelosi that they're not going to reelect her as Speaker of the House unless she brings this bill, H.R. 1384, which was put forward by Representative Pramila Jayapal, and basically it's a Medicare for All bill. And so they know that the vote is not going to succeed, but the whole point is that they want the progressive representatives to put pressure on Nancy Pelosi to put it for a vote, so that they can then have on record which of the Democrats voted against it. And so after Jimmy Dore proposes on Twitter, then Justin Jackson is a running back for the Chargers. He replied to Jimmy Dore's tweet. So his tweet was, this is part of it. Now is the time for progressives to exercise their power, play hardball, and use their power for the benefit of their constituents. And then Justin Jackson replied, specifically mentioning AOC, because AOC doesn't really reply to Jimmy Dore, but she's replied to Justin Jackson before. And he says, if AOC and the squad don't do what Jimmy Dore has suggested and we withhold their vote for Pelosi for speakership until Medicare for All gets brought to the floor for a vote, they will be revealing themselves, he wrote. Power concedes nothing without a demand. And then AOC did respond to him, and she said, problem with this idea is that there isn't enough thought given to step 2. The Democratic votes aren't there yet. With razor-thin margin, the Democratic no's are greater than the margin. So you issue threats, hold your vote, and lose, then what? If you want to know who's opposed, look at the co-sponsor list. So this is how it started, and then other progressive personalities on YouTube picked up on it. Other people on Twitter picked up on it, and there's a lot that are opposed to this. But I think overall, this is a lot more people are for this than against it, and it's been a back and forth. But even today, this is the latest tweet, and this is Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez. This is her latest tweet, which was 9 hours ago. It says, so now you've actually made life harder for organizers, because if you suspect a co-sponsor isn't a genuine supporter, you now just gave them a chance to cover when the stakes are low, so now they can ward off pressure. Pay attention, actual Medicare for All grassroots organizers haven't pushed for this. And then Jimmy Dore replied, he said, fighting for things set you back. This is embarrassing now. This is garbage. No vote for Pelosi until she agrees to hold vote for Medicare for All. And that's simple. She's revealing that she thinks we're all suckers and suckers to vote for a progressive inside the Democratic Party. So I'll stop right there to get your thoughts on all this.
Wow. Interesting. It's awesome. And in some ways it's great that a very sophisticated political discussion is happening on Twitter. So, point one, Jimmy Dore is not an elected official, right? So he's not accountable to voters per se. Yes, he has followers, he has a bunch of other things, but these are ideas that he's trying to implement from outside. And yes, it could be a good idea, and I'm sure some people thought about it, but I think the brilliant response by AOC, which tells you that she really understands politics and the dynamics of power, because yes, you hold that vote, and what happens? There's no You put all these Democrats on the spot. I mean, you're going to cause it's going to be now going to be a good way to start the new Congress. Yes, we razor thin margins, and it's going to not only put people on the record. Let's say the vote does happen, it's going to put people on the record. It's going to not go anywhere, and then it's going to build all this political goodwill and attention, which is very limited. Is going to go not only addressing this issue, fighting this issue, but then afterwards, and people know how petty people in Congress can be about being called out or being challenged in this particular way. So in my mind, and AOC is accountable. She was voted. She did the right thing. She organized. She got voted. She is in a position to hold people accountable because of the power of her office, and also understands that if they want to be successful in the long term, they need to think about that. Because the other point I wanted to make was by putting those Democrats on the record, that gives more ammunition for the Republicans to use that in the midterms, which are 2 years from now. And I think we can start talking about the midterms right now, and also the presidential election in 4 more years.
Right. So I think you touched on a lot of good points there. And this article here is actually making the case for forcing a floor vote. Mm-hmm. And I read it earlier. So some of the points of this article are that there's benefit to this because AOC mentions the co-sponsor list, but just because you sponsor something doesn't mean you can't just change your mind on it the next day, just like Kamala Harris did. I mean, she co-sponsored this, and once she got on the campaign trail, she changed her mind because it was more politically beneficial for her to distance herself from supporting this. That's one of the arguments here, that being a co-sponsor doesn't really mean much unless if you have a vote, you actually see who are the Democrats that are really going to support this, and then that gives ammunition to the Republicans, but that also helps the progressives. I mean, that's good politics for progressives because now when these Democrats are up for re-election, this could be used against them. And so the other thing regarding the Republicans is that you might as well assume that the Democrats are going to lose the House in 2 years, and they're going to lose a lot more seats in the Senate because they're in power right now, and the Republicans are going to come at them with everything they have, fake or real, it doesn't matter, right? And so you might as well just assume that they're going to lose this. So another
Is that with them losing or winning the United States Senate in January?
Well, no, regardless of what happens in January, you can just, in 2 years from now, you can automatically assume that the Democrats are going to lose. At least that's Jimmy Dore's argument as well. And so what he's saying is that right now is the best possible time that these progressive representatives can put pressure on Pelosi because we also happen to be in the middle of a pandemic. And just think about how much ammunition that gives to progressives in 2 years if there is a race and a progressive Democrat is running against a more moderate Democrat. And he says, this guy voted against Medicare for All during the middle of a pandemic. I mean, that's terrible. That really, if you could focus an entire campaign just based on that.
Yes, and I think it's important to point out first of all, as somebody who understands how difficult it is to get a member of Congress or the Senate to sponsor or to sign a letter, I think we need to let people know that it's really difficult to get a member of Congress or any elected official to put their name or their signature on a document, and that having that is a big big. It's put it out there, right? It's public. People can use it both for you and against you. And obviously, depending how the political winds go, you can benefit from that, right? Because if a progressive candidate, if a Bernie Sanders would have gotten the nomination, then Kamala could have said, "Hey, I was a sponsor of Medicare for All. Let's work together." She could potentially still be the vice presidential candidate for the presidency. So in some ways, it was a brilliant political move. But I
But
think the risk with this, and yes, I agree to an extent. I agree because this is the time where if you want to exert your power, you have to do it. The problem is that it's going to create a lot of bad energy. More importantly, it's going to make Pelosi look as an ineffective leader. And even if she's not perceived as an ineffective Speaker of the House, is going to consume the energy, not only her energy, of the new Biden administration, of members of Congress or the Senate. So in some ways, that infighting is beneficial to the Republicans because instead of Congress and the administration working to get things passed and to reverse some of the damage done by this current administration, they're going to have to focus on managing the situation, and perhaps ultimately they're able to come to an agreement that makes sense. Maybe a commitment, maybe not a vote, but maybe a vote, and then they move on. But then the amount of political energy and capital that gets wasted instead of repairing the country and getting some good things done is tremendous, which then puts the moderates in a position to demand more. Not only that, they're also going to be more vulnerable. So they're going to be, um, they're not going to be a good group to work with. And chances are, because there's more of them, they're going to weigh more power and they're going to sway more influence because there's more of them currently. So again, this is where it goes back to AOC points that first you have to think of what's after. Do you have the political capital to sustain your victory if you do decide to have this battle?
but the more attention this gets, the more infighting there is, the more controversial it becomes. It's even better because it puts Medicare for All in the spotlight, and then there'll be coverage of it. And if they had this vote and there was no coverage and it failed, then it wouldn't be as successful as it generating a lot of controversy and a lot of media attention. Because I think that's the point. That's the point of why this needs to be pushed, or at least the argument for this.
Yeah, I mean,
And
but we're living a pandemic. We are fighting for the Affordable Care Act. So I think there's plenty of evidence to to show the importance. We have the disparities that became so apparent because of the coronavirus pandemic. But yes, that's a nice message. Yes, maybe in liberal, moderate outlets, that will be the message. Look, Medicare for All is there. People agree for it. That sounds great. But what the Republicans are going to do are going to look. The Democrats are fighting against each other. They don't even know what they want. They they don't have the votes to pass this. Joe Biden is ineffective. Get us back to office. We'll get things going in the right direction. We'll give you freedom. We'll give you the opportunity to keep your doctor and not worry about these crazy socialists who are trying to give you government health care.
I
And
mean, but a big percentage of the country now supports Medicare for All, even Republicans. I'm starting to wonder how successful that would be. Of course, the Republicans will spin it however way they
exactly.
can to try to make the Democrats look bad. But so here we get to the other critical issue with this, and the reasons why people oppose this is, or also the reason why the progressives want to push this is that the reasoning that you just gave me, that can be used anytime something uncomfortable needs to be presented to Nancy Pelosi or to the Democratic establishment. Anytime the progressives want to push for something that is going to be controversial, that same reasoning can always be used to say this isn't a good time. This is going to be disruptive. This is going to cause infighting. The Republicans will use it against us. And this is going to hurt the social justice Democrats. By the way, these are the social justice Democrats right here.
Ooh.
And
Social justice Democrats.
Yeah. So these are the ones that they're saying that AOC could try to work with, and especially these four here: Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, and Rashida Tlaib, and then herself. So this is the squad, and then and then the Social Justice Democrats. So they're saying they have enough to pressure Pelosi to say, look, if she just gets a few of them, they can withhold their vote and make her give them something in return for their vote. And so this is the only time that they'll be able to do this, because in 2 years, like I said, I don't think they'll have the numbers. And then if your reasoning is that right now is not a good time, dude, if right now during the middle of a pandemic is not a good time to try to pressure a vote so you can have people on record voting no against it, then when are you going to get that? You're not going to get that. This is good political maneuvering. You worked in DC for a long time. You know how political maneuvering works. And I understand what you're saying about these representatives have to work with each other. They have to compromise. And yeah, that's important. But they also have to push each other. They also have to make each other uncomfortable, don't they? They also have to say, if I'm going to vote for you, you have to give me something in return. And that's all that the progressives are saying. They're saying, look, if we're going to help reelect Nancy Pelosi to the House again, you need to get something from her. That's just good politics.
It is. And I think, to your point, is a great political strategy. And it would be great if it's successful. It would be seen as, that was, and again, it may or may not work.
Well, how are you measuring success, though?
I think if they get either they get the vote or they get some sort of commitment that brings this issue to the forefront. Let's say there's a commitment to introduce a bill in the first 100 days, something like that's concrete, something that they can do, or to your point, to have a vote in the House floor, to put all those members in the record. So yes, so if they're able to do that or get something that advances that goal, it's going to be a great political strategy. But again, it's going to build resentment with moderates. It's also going against the perceived priorities of that the country has right now, which is the COVID-19 vaccine, manage the COVID, the economy. And I think when you start thinking about impacting people's homes, in people's heads and people's bellies, that is what motivates a lot of voters. So people are anxious. There's a lot of people who are not working, people who want to get back on their feet, people who are about to lose their homes, whether it's a home that they own or an apartment that they rent. So there's this very, very important issues on the line for millions of people.
But the Democrats and the Republicans are already going to fail people in that regard, because the stimulus package is even less than half of what they were fighting for, the one that Nancy Pelosi initially rejected, and now it's under $1 trillion, not even $1 trillion, and it doesn't include a stimulus check. So I think in that regard, even if you don't put pressure on Pelosi to hold this vote, whatever the Democrats and the Republicans agree on with this stimulus package, it's already going to not be good enough for a lot of Americans.
It's not.
Yeah, right.
It's not going to be sufficient, but it's going to be something. And the play, and right now the current. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that pressuring Pelosi to have this vote doesn't affect that in any way. And I wanted to read this part right here because I think this is important. It says, unlike other progressive priorities such as student debt cancellation and provision of stimulus checks, initiating floor vote is wholly within Nancy Pelosi's purview. It's a power she can exercise unilaterally. And so it's all on her. She can do this. That's why this is brilliant, because it specifically targets her. She has the power to do this. And earlier when I mentioned how would you measure success, to me success, obviously there'll be a vote and it'll fail. But you're going to have a record of who decided to vote against it during the middle of a pandemic. That, for someone progressive like me that wants to elect more progressives into the House, this is great. because now you have them on record and you can attack them. You can go after them 2 years from now. And look, to whatever extent the Republicans can also benefit from this, I don't know. Maybe I have a blind spot there and I'm not seeing that. But this is great for progressives. And yeah, Republicans might try to use it to their advantage as well. But their base is also for Medicare for all. This is a clear example of the people want universal health care. It's just the elected officials are not giving it to them.
No, yeah, and I think because this is not going to happen until January 6th, I believe, when the House comes back to do their official vote. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, kudos on them for putting this on the table. And now I'm sure that there's a lot of people not sleeping right now trying to manage not only this, but the current agreement on the table, as well as the broader agreement on funding the government. And that's one of the reasons why those big type of bills happen around this time, is because the end of year, people want to go home. Yeah. People want to go home and get things done. People are tired. The government too. So we'll see. So if on January 6th we wake up and let's hypothetically say that the Democrats have won the 2 Senate seats, I think it's a very different calculation, right? Because in some ways they will have the Senate. In some ways, maybe they'll be able to, okay, now we can do whatever this social justice Democrats are asking, because we have the ability to control the agenda across the government, and we can get things done.
But this vote won't pass. It won't pass the House. It won't even make it to the Senate. This is just to get them on record voting no. This is this does.
But this is so getting a vote before the end of the session in order for them to vote when they come back, when the new Congress reconvenes on the 6th, to vote for her as Speaker of the House.
They want her to agree to hold a vote, and then it makes more sense then for them to just hold it after the Senate election in Georgia.
But so let's play this out. So let's say they hold their vote. They're not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi. Who's going to challenge Nancy Pelosi? And is that person who challenges Nancy Pelosi going to have enough votes in the first round? Chances are they're not, because they, to an extent, they owe Nancy Pelosi a lot, because she fundraised, she coached, she led the strategy. So there's a lot of people in Congress right now who owe their careers, successful careers in Congress, to her. So there's going to take a while. So there's going to be a multiple votes, multiple sessions. That's going to erode the process, or, unless they agree to do something that, yes, Pelosi can agree to this demand, but then the moderates are going to ask more of Pelosi. And because they're a bigger group, they're going to get more and are going to ask for more. Or the other scenario is, there's so much back and forth. Maybe a majority leader comes out, maybe it doesn't. Or if a new leader comes out, who knows how effective they will be able to legislate in a very short amount of time. Very short amount. It's 6 months, 7 months before people are already thinking about the midterm election in 2022.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's not going to be comfortable, especially for Nancy Pelosi. But again, if you don't do this now, when are you going to do it? When will they do it? There's not going to be a better time to try to put some pressure on her. If you can't put pressure on Democratic establishments, on Nancy Pelosi, to give you something in return, like look at what happened with Joe Biden. Did you hear that leaked interview when he was speaking to a group of civil rights leaders in the African American community? And they were asking him for a national, for things around police brutality, something like, hey, can we have a national database where we can keep track of these repeat offenders, these police officers that have multiple offenses against them, complaints. And dude, the way he talked to them, he pretty much told them to shut the hell up. That he's been the best representative for the African American community, that there's no one else that has done more than he has. the tone, it was like so condescending, just pretty much telling, like, it felt like he thought very little of them. and
Or he
and
took it personal.
yeah, and he was yelling at them, like, no respect at all, no regard for them. And see, this group should have been asking for these things from Biden before they elected him, right? Because these guys, they won't give you anything. You have to demand, and you have to put pressure on them. And the other, because you worked in DC for a while, so this is the other part that I think makes it difficult for an elected official like AOC, is that, yeah, they do build relationships once they get to DC, and how good they are at networking and building those relationships in a way determines how successful they're going to be, right? So when she was running for office, yeah, she would, because actually she was saying these things when she was running. She was saying that, and she even has proposed in the past that we should have a vote for Medicare for all, just to see how they're going to vote. This is her idea, actually. This is why this is so brilliant from Jimmy Dore, because this is AOC's idea. She said this before, but now that she's been elected, she's in office, she won't do it. And so this is just
Because she understands. It's not that
yes,
she won't
exactly.
do it. Is that
She
she knows how
understands.
difficult and the best way to get it done.
Right. So when she was running for office, she was for all these things. She gets into office, and she changes, and this happens to every single candidate that runs and gets elected. That once you get in there, the reality is completely different. And so, what does that look like? Like, I'm trying to understand at a personal level. She's building relationships with Nancy Pelosi, with other Democrats. So let's say she goes hard on this. Let's say she goes in, she gets into office, and she's super aggressive, and she's for doing things like this. How long before they alienate her and isolate her? She'll
Yeah,
be completely isolated, right?
it could. Yeah,
And she
that's
doesn't have enough. She doesn't have enough progressive members right now to build a more solid coalition to exert pressure from the rest of the Democrats.
yep,
So
precisely.
essentially, we're saying, AOC, we sent you to. So I think there's a disconnect here between the people and AOC, in that people like Jimmy Dore and me are saying, we sent you to Congress to commit political suicide as you fight for our needs. And she was
Yeah.
thinking, I go to Congress and I fight, and I also rise up the ranks strategically, even if it means that I'm not going to always fight for what my constituency needs. Because otherwise,
So she could be the next Nancy Pelosi, and she can decide when to hold or not hold these votes.
right. So that's what sucks about it, that this is how these politicians end up working. And I understand it's like it's a tough. It's suppose self-preservation, right? She's looking out for herself as well. I mean, she's willing to fight for her constituency. She's willing to fight for those that voted for her, as long as it doesn't cost her her career.
I,
And
I,
if she's super aggressive about it, I think they'll alienate her. I mean, maybe not in this one instance, but eventually, if she's always like this, super aggressive, yeah, they'll find a way to alienate her because she has the minority. And so she has to find the right balance. And but I think it's still important to put pressure on her to say, oh, well, Jimmy Dore hasn't used that language to say you need to commit career suicide for us, but he does call her out for being an establishment Democrat, that she's just looking to climb up the ladder, that she's just following, going along with whatever Nancy Pelosi does. Like certainly there's a spectrum here, and you can be too cozy with Nancy Pelosi, and try to play by all those rules, and hope that they give you positions that are of more importance, and hope that you rise up the ranks and you can recruit more progressive candidates. And then there's also the other side of that spectrum is being super aggressive. But maybe there's a balance, right? Like you think that her bringing this vote, or her organizing a group of other representatives to put this pressure on Pelosi, in this one case, in addition to whatever else she's also doing, you think that is equivalent to like career suicide for her?
it is, and in some ways, it's funny that we're having this conversation because in some ways, Nancy Pelosi represents and comes from what historically has been the heart of liberal democratic politics, which is San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, you can say that the city of San Francisco, elected officials from San Francisco who then go to serve in state office, national office, are the ones that have been leading the progressive fights at all levels that eventually led to the victories at the national level in so many issues, particularly LGBT rights, just to say one. So yeah, so in some ways it is career suicide because, it's not, yes, it's about raising money, but it's also about building those relationships. And it's also about building relationships. And it's also about nurturing the vision, the idea, the philosophy that you're promoting. And yes, and you want to hold the establishment accountable, but if somebody like AOC overplays her political hand, yes, she's gonna get stuck, right? Or she either gets stuck and is pigeonholed, or will eventually lose or not decide not to run because she won't be effective. Her bills won't pass. She won't get the assignments
Mm-hmm.
that will help her
And then
advance her career and be in a position to advance her interests within the system that's established. And it sucks,
and then
but it
they'll
is what
well,
it
and then
is.
when she's up for re-election, they'll make sure to fund somebody to run against her so that she doesn't win re-election, right? I
Yeah,
mean, they'll
and
use
just kind of
they'll
the same way that progressives have done that to moderate Democrats, and how Democrats have done that to Republicans,
right,
and
but
vice versa. I mean, that's a political
but
game we live. So
but
she can
there's
she can go up and die on this hill, and then maybe there's additional battles and additional hills that she will be able to climb, or it'll be a while before the rest of the progressive uh, party comes into the type of influence, political influence, financial influence, sway with the public to advance their vision.
but there is a difference though when the full wrath of the democratic establishment comes after you with all of their resources to influence the propaganda in the news and on social media.
Yeah,
They have deep
but
pockets versus the progressives that are grassroots movements that are trying to raise money from people. So if they come after her, then it's a lot tougher on her than if when the progressives are coming after the Democratic establishment or the Republican establishment.
that's true. But also, let's acknowledge the fact that I think the progressive establishment or the progressive wing has been in a strong position. And I mean, the fact that there's a social justice Democrats now, I think there's plenty of well-to-do, wealthy, financial, liberal folks who are there supporting progressive ideas. So in some ways, it is a battle about that. And the other thing is because these races, because of Congress and Senate, or whatever elected office, is really about the people who vote for you. So yes, money helps, messaging helps, but if you have a strong ground game, if the
If,
majority of residents in your district support you, then you're fine because as long as you're supported back home, that works. But as soon as you're not staying in touch to what is happening in the district, you're not representing the voice of the current voters or to those folks who are engaged to vote in your district, that means that pretty soon you're going to be gone.
well,
So,
yeah,
but so
but
yes, money is important, but I think the political organization that happens in the district is important. And I'm seeing that there's more progressives who are being elected from across the country. So I think that bodes well for the more liberal party.
right. So as long as your voters support you, you're safe. But remember, voters watch television, they read news,
Hmm.
they're easily influenced by propaganda. So
Yep.
if you throw a lot of money to a campaign to oust her, I'm sure you can find or you can put a dent into her support. So that's always that tricky balance between having support and losing it, especially if somebody with deep pockets comes after you. We saw what happened with the proposition for Lyft and Uber to make them consider their employees as full-time employees, not contractors. And look at how
Hmm.
much money they threw into that campaign, and then they got their way. So yeah, so this isn't these things are never static. They're fluid, so you can always change perceptions. You can always change people based on how much money you throw into the advertising. And
Well, they
so,
had their way, they had the money, but I think they also had the service, the messaging too, right? So they were
right, but
able
that's
to
just
speak
propaganda.
to,
That's just messaging.
yeah,
That's
it
just
is.
yeah, that's just PR. So why wouldn't the Democrats be able to do an effective PR campaign against AOC if they want to get her out of office? I'm just saying these are the consequences of what would happen if she goes full force against the Democratic establishment. So I know she's trying to play it smart, and she's trying to survive, maybe hoping that she can get more support in the years to come. But I also think that, look, if she puts pressure on Nancy Pelosi right now, yeah, she might burn a few bridges, but I don't think that would amount to career suicide for her. And I think if she really does care about building a progressive movement, this is a great opportunity for her to do this, because then in 2 years, if more progressives can then use this to win office, then her group, her coalition grows, and she is the figure of that coalition. So it gives her even more power. So this is, yeah. So you might consider it a risky play, but strategically speaking, politically, it may make sense for her as well, if she chooses to take that risk. I mean, she should do it because it's the
Yeah,
right thing to do
but
for her, for the people, because most people support Medicare for all at this point.
yeah,
But
and are you bothered at all that it was Jamie Dore who's promoting this idea? Is there anything that strikes you weird between that
well,
dynamic there?
well, I'm not surprised that Jimmy Dore mentioned this. I've been following him for a long time, so I
That
know
you have
his.
you have a white man telling a woman of color what she should do politically?
I mean, look, he goes hard after Republicans. He goes hard after male political figures as well. If you can
So in some
show,
ways, this is just treating AOC just like he treats everyone else.
yeah, if you can show me instances where that's not the case, then yeah, we can look at that. But based on everything that I've seen, I mean, he just goes hard on establishment Democrats, establishment Republicans, whether they're male or female. So I haven't seen anything there. It is unfortunate and sad that this type of discourse needs to come from, and pressure needs to come from comedians, right? It's not going to come from the establishment, and not even from mainstream media. But right now, these are the people that are, these are the figures that are speaking for the people. And look, he took a lot of heat for this, and not everyone's on board with this. I mean, some people are making arguments for why you shouldn't do this, and they'll mention some of the same points that you did.
Yeah, I mean, you got in some ways it's funny that you have a comedian telling an elected member of Congress how to do her job, right? So
Well,
it's
comedians,
imagine if AOC was telling her, "Hey, Jimmy, this is how you should tell your jokes.
I mean,
Why
she
do you, or
she she
you should do
could,
this and that?"
but look, comedians have always spoken out against,
For
or a lot
sure.
of comedians have spoken out against politicians. The only difference is that these comedians have a platform now. You didn't have
Hmm.
10 years ago, and before that, you didn't have Twitter, you didn't have YouTube. This guy has almost 1 million followers, and not it's not just him. I mean, look, Kyle Kalinske and even Sam Cedar from the Majority Report, and and there were other members that
But
picked
at the
this
end
up.
of the day, it's not their name on the bill. It's not their signature on a letter. It's not their yes or no vote. It's not their campaign. So
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just
So
trying to bring perspective,
no,
right?
no, no,
So
I
it's
agree. So that's why I was saying that basically what we're all expecting AOC to do is tantamount to career suicide for the sake of fighting for us.
no, and it's not career suicide. Again, like yes, I mean it could be career suicide, and I guess maybe let's not call it that. I have some. I know suicide. Well, suicide. I heard a
Okay,
story that just the other day that unfortunately suicide because of everything that's going on is on the
the rates are
rise.
on the rise.
But I think it could be a potentially a bad political move, but it could also be a great move, and it could be the move where she solidifies herself as like you said, she's the leader of the progressive movement. There'll be more money coming her way, more influence, and then Pelosi could be, you know what? Let me give her a leadership position because she needs to be an important part of my wing. Let's say it's her, right? Who's chosen as the spokesperson for that. And that could be a good move for her, and then she'll be able to rise and be in a better place to get more things done on behalf of. So it could also be at the same time, it could be a brilliant move, or the move that helps her career go to the next level of influence under hopefully a Senate, on a Democratic Senate.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I won't call it that. I'll just say that we're asking her to risk being alienated, and
Yes.
which is, if we elect an official to go fight and represent us, I think that's a fair ask.
Yes, no, it is. And I guess for me, and it's interesting because in some ways, AOC is a candidate that, yes, it was the constituents in her district who voted for her, but I know she also has a lot of approach, a lot of support across the country, and that people who donated from outside of the district, and what allowed her to take a Democratic incumbent with the right messaging, with the right political operation. So in some ways, she is beholden to this broader movement beyond her voters, which is understandable why people like you feel that you voted for her and that she's there representing your interests. Because in some ways she is. So at the same time, also I want to acknowledge that in the same way that some people felt that Sanders was or is their voice in the Senate, or was the voice in the presidential candidate, or in the broader political conversation that we're having, that there's people, and it speaks to who she is and the ability for her to communicate her ideas and to navigate these types of situations. So we'll see if she decides to to go for this, or if she decides to take a different route. Maybe she'll play a jujitsu move on both parties and come on top.
Yeah, and just in closing, I think it's healthy to put this type of pressure on the elected officials, and I know that others think, well, no, let's just try to work within the system, incremental change. That's important. Yeah, that's important too. We need that, but we also need people like Jimmy Dore and other segment of the population that's putting more pressure, because then somewhere in the middle you'll get progress. And so it's never one strategy is not never or there isn't just one strategy that you can adopt. You need multiple approaches to something. And I think the big fear, at least for me and a lot of other progressives, is that, yeah, it's a small number of progressive representatives right now, and it would be so easy for them to get swallowed up by the Democratic establishment, by the politics as usual in Washington. And sure, we'll get some incremental progress, but it'll be like a snail pace. So 4 years will go, 8 years, 12, 16, 20. Next thing you know, 20 years from now, here we are, and we're just getting very little progress, very little traction with these progressives, because they get into office. You have this whole group think where they have to try to play by the rules of the existing establishment, and you wait around to try to rise up and build a coalition within that. But yeah, that I think the fear is that they get swallowed up by this huge establishment, and then it's just the progress is so minuscule that it just takes forever. So I think that's why you hear a lot of voices like Jimmy Dore just shouting and screaming to try to prevent that.
Well, my friend, the only thing you have to fear is fear itself. Uh, and I wanted to bring him into the conversation because in some ways FDR did take advantage of a crisis, of a financial crisis, a depression, the Great Depression, and then a war to advance. Well, I think even before the war, I think he was able to advance a very progressive policies. Let's also acknowledge the fact that unfortunately a lot of Black Americans and other people of color, but most of the at the time was Black Americans, were left out of the home mortgage support and the other
The
investments
GI
that
Bill.
allowed.
Yeah.
Huh?
The GI Bill.
Yeah, the GI Bill and some of the other pre-war investments that allowed so many Americans to kind of get out of depression and own a home and start rebuilding their nets. But I think, to your point, we are just coming out of a worldwide pandemic. We are in an economic crisis. So to your point, there's no better time than now. Let's do what we need to do now, because we know that even more people are hurting now. And let's move forward with Medicare for all, give people ability to see their doctors, hopefully do some preventative care, and not have to worry about their health while they try to find a job and rebuild their lives, in the years to come.
That's right. All right. Thanks for the conversation. I think we can leave it at that.
Sounds good. I have said everything I wanted to say.
So you're with me then, right? AOC should push Nancy Pelosi.
I can't confirm nor deny.
All right. All right.
Well, that's interesting that you wanna. Let me tell you about this.
All right. So we'll leave it at that. Thanks everyone for listening. Don't forget to follow us at The Brown Perspective on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. Nos vemos.
Ciao.